All right, yo. Well, we got the 2JZ engine loom out. Let's talk about the node labels. So when you guys go to create your labels, there's a few things to consider on naming the labels. If you'll notice, I'll zoom out here, and if you notice on most of the labels, on all the node ends, they're not very big. And that's fairly intentional. What's important to remember with the label is that you want the label to be descriptive enough that you know where it's going, but you also don't want to make the label so big that it interferes with the flexibility of the loom. So what I'm talking about is that on these labels, let me find a longer lead. So on these labels, and we're going to use this guy right here as the example. This is wastegate solenoid. Wastegate solenoid. So on this label, right, you go through the effort to use all these wonderful pieces and parts. You use the most flexible Tefsel wire you can find, concentrically twist to make the loom so flexible. Use DR25. It's a beautiful loom, it's very flexible. And then when you go to make the node label, right, especially in an area where normally where it's plugging in it is, not necessarily the place that has the most room, right? You go to add the node label, and what you're essentially doing is adding an area of the loom that is not really flexible anymore. So if you'll notice on this wastegate solenoid, if I wanted to turn this node, or turn this thing into a circle, the area on the label or wastegate solenoid, this is not going to flex. So this is a pretty rigid part of the loom. And it's just like on the main trunk over here, right? So this main trunk from the engine bulkhead here, if you bend this as far as you can, this area that's right here with the label, this is going to be the most rigid part of the loom. So it's the same thing over here on the wastegate solenoid. The label is going to be the most rigid part of this area of the loom where you're plugging in the wastegate solenoid. So the reason I say that is because I see a very large amount of people when they go to put labels on all the nodes, which is great to label them, right? Now granted, if I did have two connectors that could be plugged in to the wrong thing close enough where it would be an issue, normally you'd try and get something keyed different, right? But in the event, if you are relying upon the label to make sure it goes in the right place, you don't want to have, you don't want to turn cam into camshaft position, and then that label gets about 3 inches long, and now all of a sudden you have this wonderfully flexible loom that you now have put an area, that won't bend, okay? So make the labels short and concise. So here's an example for the injectors: INJ6, INJ5, etc. Again, this engine loom does not have the coils on here, so you wouldn't see coil .1, coil .2, for example. But even here we have for drive-by-wire throttle body, reverse switch, crank, alternator, ALT, right? These things don't have to be super, super long. Starter is probably the longest thing that's on here, aside from the aside from the main trunk here that had the logo with the serial number. So when you do your labels, label them, but just don't make them too long.